or actually I'll show you where I grew up. I have a little map, but today I'm going to talk to you about how we research and monitor black bear populations in the American Southwest. And if you're unfamiliar with that area, I'll show you that as well. So first off, I want to go over, well, what exactly is wildlife biology? And so wildlife biology, it's the conservation and protection of animals in the places they live so that we can keep these healthy ecosystems. So for example, some of the species that wildlife biologists work with is something like, like here, the national bird of Canada, the Canada jay, or the national mammal is the beaver. And then you have certain projects here like wildlife habitat, and I don't know if any of you have seen this, but you can buy these really cool stamps that are paintings and drawings of different ducks, and the money that is spent or collected from those goes back into helping preserve those habitats that different wildlife live in. And so if you're unfamiliar with the American black bear, the American black bear is a large carnivore, and it's found only in North America. And so here's a map of North America in the light gray. This is currently in the dark gray and light gray. That's currently where you can find black bears across the entire continent. And even though the black bear is called a black bear, it's actually can be a lot of different colors. So here's kind of your traditional colored black bear, nice and jet black, but they also come in kind of a brown or a cinnamon color. Sometimes they'll look blonde. And we have two really special bears. This one on the left here, this is called a kermode or a spirit bear, and they're only found in islands off the coast of British Columbia. And then you also have here, this is called a glacier blue bear, and they get that name by their blue colored fur. And those are found here kind of in Southeast Alaska and Northwest British Columbia. And those are two really rare color types. Usually you're going to see your black bears, they're more up here in Canada and the US, kind of in those dark forests. And then when you don't have very much rain and you get kind of nice brown and yellow colors on the landscape, then you start seeing more of these brown and yellow bears to try and fit in and camouflage in with their environment. And so bears, well, where do they live? So their habitat, and then what do they eat or their diet? Well, as most of you probably know, black bears like to live in forests. And then they also, even though they are a carnivore, their majority of their diet comes from eating plants. So things like acorns from oak trees, different berries, and depending on where you're at, there's a lot of different species. And then this is a really cool thing they eat down here in the Southwest. This is called bear corn. It looks like a corn on the cob. And this is a fungus that grows only at the base of certain types of trees. And so it's only available for a little bit time of the year for the bears to eat. And so what I'm going to be talking to you a little bit today is, well, how do we actually count how many bears there are, right? There's not many of them. You really don't see them, and they're pretty secretive, so it's hard to see them. And so we can't just go out and walk through the forest and use our binoculars to count how many there are. So we have to come up with some different kind of cool ways to do it. And the first thing that I want you guys to remember is there's two terms that we use in wildlife biology a lot. The first is abundance. And abundance is just the number of animals, that's it, the number of animals. And so, for example, what's the abundance of bears in this black box? 5, right? We have 5 black bears. However, sometimes you need to know, well, exactly, if I said there are 5 black bears, I need to know, well, where, in what area is that 5 black bears in, just Toronto, or is it in your local park? Is it in your backyard? Or is it in all of Canada? And that's where we get to this second term. This is called density. And that's still the number of area or number of animals, but now we have this explicit piece of information here we need to know, which is, well, in what area are those? So for example, if we want to look at the red and the black box here, the area is the exact same, right? The two boxes are the same size, but there's 5 bears in here and there's 2 bears in here. So that means your density is there's 5 bears per box of this size versus 2 bears per box of this size. So that means there's a higher density of bears in the black box than there is in the red box. And so that's what my research was focused on, was saying, okay, well, now that we know where we want to look, how many actual animals live in that area? And so my research was done in New Mexico. So that's 2,700 kilometers away from where you guys are. And so the American Southwest is what we call the US, we have states instead of provinces. And so the states of Arizona, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas, they make up the American Southwest. And the American Southwest, or New Mexico specifically, is comprised of a really cool landscape. And so you have places like here, which we have high elevation forests. So this is sitting at about 2,500 meters. You have these cool desert mountains. You have desert, so we have deserts and we have forests all across the state. And so black bears, as they live in mountain ranges that have forests, are only found, so here's the state of New Mexico, and black bears are only found in this gray stuff. So this is black bear habitat across the whole state. So there's not many areas where these bears are living. And so I was looking at, well, how many bears are in this mountain range in the northern part of the state, this in the southern part of the state, and then there's a little tiny mountain range here in the central part of the state. And those are the 3 areas that I wanted to know how many black bears there are. And so the way we do that, and here's a black bear that came to one of our sites, is we use something called a hair trap. So we can't go and physically capture all the bears, right? That's really hard to do. And, we also it would be really expensive to do. And we also don't want to potentially capture them because sometimes physically capturing an animal can be hard on the animal. And so a hair trap is a piece of barbed wire. So like the wire that we use for fences and stuff, that is put around like trees in like a corral fashion. And in the middle of that circle, you put a big pile of wood. And then here you can see you pour a bunch of stinky lure on top of it. And in this case, this is a mixture of cow blood and stinky rotten fish. And so we try and get something that's really, really, really stinky. And when a bear walks across this piece of wire, it grabs a piece of hair from him. We also use something called bear rubs here down on the left. And bears naturally rub on different objects. So this guy is a big bear, and he's rubbing on a power pole. And so we put a couple pieces, you can maybe see a couple little pieces of barbed wire on that power pole. So when he rubs against it, again, we snag some hair from that power pole. And so why we collect the hair is because we want to then figure out, well, which bear left it. And so what we do for that is we use the DNA. So DNA is just it's the molecule that's found inside your cells, and it acts as like a set of directions or a recipe for who you are. It's why I have blonde hair and light colored skin, because my DNA says that's what I'm going to have. And so what we can do is we can identify specific areas in your DNA that act like, if you have ever been to the store with your parents, and when they scan the food across and you hear the beeping noise, well, they're scanning that barcode to know what that piece of food is. And so we can do the same thing with DNA inside of the hair sample. And so we can get the DNA out of the hair sample, we can scan that little barcode, and then we can actually figure out that, oh, this piece of hair came from this bear. And with that information, we can actually count how many bears we captured or detected using these hair traps and bear rubs. And so we placed so each of these little black dots, so these are these 3 mountain ranges that I showed you earlier, but they're zoomed in. And they're really big areas. To get from, say, from here to drive over and up here would take you about 3 hours to drive that distance, okay? And so each one of those dots we hiked to,
Hello?
and we put one of those hair traps and poured out the stinky lure. And then we went back multiple times and we collected hair from those hair traps. And so here, this is called the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. This is an area in the Southwest has a lot of Spanish speaking people. And so a lot of the mountain ranges have Spanish names. And so the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, we put almost 400 of those hair traps out. And then here in the Sandia Mountains, this is that really small mountain range in the center of the state. We only put 12 of them out. That's how small that area was. And from that, we collected over 4,000 of those hair samples. So here's me checking one of those hair traps. And then this is a girl that worked for me. Her name was Shelby. She was collecting hair from one of these power poles. And so we collected 4,000 samples. And from that, we could detect 726 individual bears across those 3 mountain ranges. And so the issue with that is we want to know how many bears are there total. Yes, we may have detected 700 bears, but you don't always detect everything that might be there, right? It's kind of like, think of trying to, there's a big sandbox and someone puts a bunch of marbles in it. And then they stir it up and they tell you to go find it. And you're digging through the sandbox and you find 10 marbles. Well, there might be 10 more marbles in there that you didn't find. And so that's something that we work with. And you can do these cool math equations that allow you to put in how many individuals you saw. And then it'll try and use that math equation to then figure out, well, this is how many bears we think are still out there. And then you can add the 2 together and actually determine again what your abundance is. That was what that term I talked about earlier. Remember the number of things? Well, now we can figure out in this mountain range, based off of our math equation, there are almost 2,000 bears in that mountain range. And in this small mountain range, there's 43 bears. And then in this mountain range, it's kind of, so you see this box. This is what, 2, 4, 6, 8, about 10 boxes is the length of this mountain range. That would fit 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That would be an area about this big in this mountain range. And so we found 43 in this, and then we found almost 600 bears in this mountain range. And so just to kind of tell you guys, this kind of research happens all over North America. There was actually a study conducted a few years ago on the Bruce Peninsula National Park and the Bruce Peninsula itself, just north of you guys, right? So the Bruce Peninsula, they put those same little hair traps across this whole area where this white outline is. And in Bruce Peninsula, they found there was 300 bears in this peninsula. And in Bruce National Park, they found that there's 97 of those bears in the national park. And so we know that the abundance of bears is 300 and the abundance of bears in the national park is 97. And so one of the things we use density for is to try and compare how many bears are in each area, for example. Like if you said I had 1 bear in my backyard and you had 1 bear in the whole province of Ontario, those are very different, right? 1 bear in 1 backyard is a very small area, meaning you have a lot of bears in that small area, versus 1 bear in Ontario, you don't have many bears in that whole state, right? And so when we try to compare those numbers, we want to make sure that we're looking at the same size area. So for example, if we wanted to have the same number of um, of bears in the Bruce Peninsula National Park. So if you remember, there was 97 bears in here, but we want to know how many are in a specific area. We're going to try and see if you guys have ever visited High Park there in Toronto. We want to know, well, what would be the density of bears in High Park that would be equal to the number of bears in Bruce Peninsula National Park? And so to do that, Bruce Peninsula National Park has about 1 bear per 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. Okay, so that's 4 kilometers square. And we would need about 4 High Parks to equal 1 black bear. So that would be the same comparison between Bruce National Park and High Park. We need 1 bear in 4 High Parks to have the same number of bears as Bruce National Park. And so with that, we learned that, well, the abundance, just to quickly go over what we learned here today, the abundance is the number of animals, okay? Density is the number of animals in a specific area. And so that's important so we can compare 2 areas and have an understanding of if they're similar or not. And we've also learned that you can actually identify bears just from grabbing a sample of their hair, right? They have DNA inside of them, and that DNA is like a barcode that we can identify who that individual is. And we also know that there's bears that are close to you guys. So the Bruce Peninsula National Park has bears. Near Ottawa, all the forests up there, they have bears. And as you go around to the east and up north into the forest north of Toronto there, they have bears as well. And so that was just a brief little presentation on kind of the research that I do. But I also wanted to show you guys kind of an example of who are wildlife biologists and what other cool things do wildlife biologists do. And so with that, wildlife biologists, who can be one? Anyone, okay? So these are, some of these are my friends and other people. Karina Newsom here, she's an ornithologist. She founded Black Birders Week, which is just celebrated a few weeks ago, that celebrates Black Americans in the wildlife field. This is my girlfriend, Jasmine. She's working on lake sturgeon, which are big prehistoric like fish that live in the rivers and lakes near Toronto and Ontario and in this area. And her family came from Mexico and now live in the US. This is my friend Fitzum. He came over from Ethiopia, and now he is a professor at New Mexico State. And then we have, these are a group of people that are Native Americans that are wildlife biologists well. And then last, to talk about kind of close to you guys. So this guy here, this is Jay. And Jay is a friend of mine, and he actually grew up in Toronto as well. And now he's a wildlife biologist. And this is Jay and I going to a Toronto Maple Leafs game together down in Arizona. So that was really fun. So I just want to show that anyone can be a wildlife biologist. And there's lots of areas for you guys to work in. So for example, you can work in deserts. You can work along the ocean coast. You can work in rivers and streams. You can work in mountains. You can work in cities. So there's a lot of different options for you if you would like to, be a wildlife biologist as an adult. And so for me, I've had a lot of fun. I've got to do a lot of different things. So over my career as a wildlife biologist, I got to hike the tallest peak in New Mexico called Wheeler Peak, and it's over 4,000 meters tall. I've also get to drive around and hike in these mountain ranges. And so you can see these really cool trees called yucca trees that grow super high down in the desert grasslands. And then there's these island mountain ranges that the bears live in. There's big expansive grass valleys. This is desert mountain ranges again. This was along the Mexico border, which was really fun to explore. Here's another place in New Mexico that I visited. Here's a bunch of cactus with some really cool, pretty flowers that were blooming. And then some of the wildlife I've seen has been really cool. So this is called a western meadowlark, and they are a songbird. They have a really pretty song that lives primarily in areas that are grass. And then these are bighorn sheep, and they live up in really rough and rugged mountain ranges, and they grow these really big horns. And this is a baby bighorn sheep that we captured, and we were trying to study, you know, how long they were living and what areas their moms like to use after they gave birth to them. There's other cool animals, like this is a badger that I did some research on, and we were trying to count how many badgers were in an area. And instead of using DNA to do it, we actually looked at the pattern of this stripe that went down his forehead. And so almost like using fingerprints on him, we could take a picture and we could identify different badgers by this stripe in the middle of their forehead. He's actually coming out of this is a water tank, since in the desert there's not much water. There's some of these tanks that have water for wildlife. We've gotten different pictures of wolves, and this is a grizzly bear, and this is a great horned owl, and this is a type of weasel that lives in the forests of Montana. Other cool things, different snakes. This is a rattlesnake. Here's a big tarantula that we found, and then another really pretty bird. And then also I got to meet a lot of cool people. So these are guys that worked for me. These are some antlers. So that deer and caribou and elk, the antlers they carry on their head and they shed. We find them, and we built a cool arch one summer. And then there's also some dangers involved in it. You know, we have forest fires that we had to deal with. And then sometimes, you know, it's super hot out and super dry, and those can lead to forest fires. You guys haven't had to deal with those in Ontario because of the amount of rain we get, but sometimes out west, that's a big concern. Other things I've done, captured little baby owls and baby sheep, and this is baby elk, as well as help put up place for mama ducks to have their little ducklings lay their eggs and have their ducklings and be safe from predators. I've also helped capture, let's see if I can turn this off. I've also helped capture black bears. So here's a black bear that was coming into where we were trying to capture it, and we had this site baited with some stuff for it to come visit. And with that job, so that was primarily my job, main job in this one was to capture bears. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to put these collars on them. And the collars are GPS collars. So kind of like how your phone has a GPS in it, so you can work your way through the city. These collars will take a location of the animal every couple hours for us, and then we can follow them remotely. And so here's a grizzly bear that we captured and a black bear. And so we capture them by having these cables that they step in, and it tightens around their paw. And so here's a black bear that I captured, and here's the inside of a grizzly bear's mouth. You can see his big teeth. And this was a young guy, so they're nice and white and very, they're not worn down. Here's just a little black bear that we caught. This guy was only about 50 pounds, but he kept stealing our bait. And it took a while for us to catch him. And with that, I thought I would cut it short. I have some cool videos that we can show if you guys would be interested in. But first, what I want to do is thank everyone that has helped with this. So even though in wildlife biology, you know, I do a lot of work myself, a lot of this work wouldn't be possible but without working with other people. And so there's a lot of people that have helped provide money, who have helped collect certain data, who have allowed us to collect data on their property. And without those people, a lot of this research wouldn't be possible. And with that, if you guys have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take time to answer them for you.
What was the biggest animal you caught?
Ooh, the biggest animal. Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to put some...
In numbers.
In numbers. Okay. I'm going to put some pictures up so I can show them to you. How about that? So the biggest animal we caught was a grizzly bear. And that grizzly bear, let's see, get that picture up. It'll take a second. That grizzly bear was about 300 kilograms. I don't know why you can't see this picture. Let's see here. One sec. Let me see if I can get this picture for you guys. Yeah, the biggest bear we have. There we go. Now we got it. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
So this bear was, so he was 700 pounds. So that is about, no, that's more than 300 kilograms. That's almost 400 kilograms. And, you know, for example, I only weigh, how many kilograms do I weigh? Oh, this is tough. We Americans work in pounds instead of kilograms. So I weigh, what, 65 kilograms? Something like that? 70 kilograms? No, probably more than that. But anyways, this guy was almost, you know, 1.5, or no, 2. Here, I can put it in pounds. That's easier. I'll just work in pounds and I'll tell you in kilograms. 1, 2, 3. This guy was 4 times, he weighed 4 times more than I did. And he was 700 pounds or 400 kilograms.
We have another question from Harini.
Yeah.
Can we unmute Harini, please?
How many animals did you catch so far?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I don't know. I think for bears, I've captured about 20. But I've also captured different things like rabbits and quail, which are little tiny birds. Baby sheep we've captured. But most of the stuff I've captured has been bears.
Okay, next question will be from Naren. Naren, you can unmute and ask the question.
What's the rarest animal you've captured?
Ooh, the rarest. Let me think of that one. Ooh, I have a good one. I even have a video of it. So the rarest animal I have captured, I was working with a group of people to capture these guys. They're called black-footed ferrets. And they are these little weasels. So they're the rarest mammal in North America. Let me see if I can see it on my screen, see if I can bring them. And they look like little, if you put a slinky in a sock. You guys remember, know slinkies, those little things that you put down the stairs? So these guys, they live in, so black-footed ferrets, they live in grasslands and prairies, and they hunt prairie dogs. And so they look like a little miniature wiener dog. They're really long and skinny. And they go down into the prairie dog's holes, and that's where they hunt. And that's the rarest animal I've caught.
Okay, next question from Eshana. Go ahead. You can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Why did you only do bears? Like, was it just a random pick to do bears, or like was it based on something?
Good question. A few reasons. So, I grew up in Montana, and I will show you where that is. Go back to that slide. How about that? Ooh. I guess I can go like this, and this will be, okay, let's go to that slide. So I grew up in Montana. That's this state right here. And I grew up here in the southwest corner of it. And so when I went to school, during the summer, we applied for jobs to get experience working with different wildlife. And I got a job in northwest Montana up here along the Canadian border. So this is along British Columbia and Alberta. And I got a job working with bears. And I fell in love with them because they're these really, really big bears. Remember that grizzly bear that was 400 kilograms? Well, that guy eats 80% of the time, he eats nothing but berries and grasses and vegetation. So he'll eat some meat, but he's mainly eating salad. Can you imagine getting to be 400 kilograms eating salad? And so he does that, and he eats all year, and he can get that big. And he'll even get bigger towards the fall. So we captured him in the spring after he got out of hibernation. And during hibernation, during the summer, they build up all this fat so that they can go into hibernation and they can sleep without eating for like 6 months. And so they have to get all this fat. So that guy is even heavier than 400 kilograms when he's going into his den in the winter. And he does that from mainly eating vegetation and berries and grasses. And so that's why I like picking bears or working with bears. And so I kept working with bears. And then when I went to school to become a doctor, the project I worked on was on bears because I had all of that experience. But now I'm working with birds of prey or raptors, so like bald and golden eagles, so the types of birds that have the big long claws and talons and stuff. That's what I'm working with now. Good question, though.
Okay, so next question, Kailas. Kailas, you can go ahead.
I saw at the start of the slide, I'm not sure, but like, I think you had it said you had a PhD. So what do you have a PhD for? Like, what did you get for it?
Yeah, so a few things. I have a bachelor's of science in wildlife biology. I got that at the University of Montana. And then I got a master's and a PhD in biology down at New Mexico State University. And so from those degrees, what you do is you do a research project. And so in this case, I was studying black bears in the Southwest. And from that research project, you go and take classes to try and learn more about different aspects of wildlife biology. You also learn more math, more statistics. And then after you get all that research done and data collected, then you write it up into something that's called a thesis or dissertation. And what that is it's a report of your research project. And once you have it written up, you present it to the public, and then you have what's called a committee. And that's committee is a group of professors that are kind of giving you advice throughout your research project. And then they test you. So instead of taking that one test in school, they sit you down and it's called a defense. So your last test is called a defense. And in my defense, it was a 3-hour-long test where you just sat there and they asked you questions and questions and questions. And you had to go up to the board and you had to draw, and then they would ask you questions until you didn't know the answer. And then once you pass, you get your PhD. And so my PhD now it shows to other people that you went through a certain type of training that allows you to get certain types of jobs. And so you can work for federal or provincial agencies. Like, for example, Ontario has an agency that is in charge of managing the moose and the beavers and the Canada jays and all the fish that you catch and eat. There's also the universities. So I have some friends that went to the University of Manitoba over in Winnipeg, or my friend Jay went to the University of Guelph. You can be a professor where you teach other people and you train other people to become wildlife biologists. And so that PhD just kind of shows the level of training you have so that you can go on and get certain types of jobs as well. Good question.
Thank you. So the next question is going to be from Darsh. Darsh, you can unmute.
What is the smallest animal you've captured?
Smallest one. Oh, goodness. I wonder if I have a picture of that guy. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure what this. I've caught a few small ones. Let's see if I have any pictures of them. I'll tell you about a few that I've caught that are super small. I've caught little baby lizards, about that big, horn lizards they're called. They're spiky and they live in the desert. I wonder if I have any pictures of those guys. Oh, here's a good picture. This was a baby bunny. This fit into my hand. That was a little tiny guy. What else? Oh, I've caught little tiny fish about that big. I've caught, yeah, I think probably the lizards or the fish. Oh, that's one that I caught. Where is that picture at? I caught a little baby tiny, it's called a grouse. And a grouse is a type of bird that they're kind of like a chicken. And these guys live in the forest. And I caught a little grouse chick that fit into the palm of my hand. He was only that big. And it was just a little fluff ball. I also caught a baby turkey that was like the same size, and it had been raining. And so it was all wet. And so I took it up and I put it in my hands and I like blew on it as a little air dryer so that I could fluff his feathers back up. And then I put him back under the tree so that he wasn't wet anymore and he could stay dry. So I've got a lot of little tiny animals, but it's hard to remember which one's the smallest.
Okay. You can ask your question.
How long have you been a biologist for?
I've been a biologist for, that's a good question. It's tough to answer because when you go to school, you don't know quite when you're a biologist or when you're a student. So I would say I have been a biologist now for about 8 years. How about that? 8 to 10 years. So I'm fresh, new biologist.
Oh, that's considered fresh. I thought, oh, you had a lot of experience.
Well, kind of. So a little bit. So I'm 31 right now, and I graduated my undergrad at 22. And, then I went and did my master's and my PhD. And so I was still going to school and still doing my research. And so I consider myself a biologist. But a lot of that was while I was still getting my degree. So it wasn't necessarily like a full-time job.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, let's move on to the next question from Harini.
How do you catch the animals? Because sometimes animals move and then they
Right. Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? So actually, and that's a good point. So that barbed wire I was using, and then that picture of the badger I showed you, because it's tough to capture animals, we try and detect animals without actually capturing them. And so we can put remote cameras up to take their pictures. So it's like if the animal walks in front of it, that motion activates the camera and it'll take a picture of it. And so we don't have to physically catch it. But there's a few different ways we can capture animals. So if you want to capture like little tiny songbirds, we put up a big net, kind of like a volleyball net. And that net is kind of like a little bag. And so the birds fly into the net, and then they get tangled into the net, and then we can carefully pull them out of the net. We can also use little like cages for smaller animals. So it's like think of like a cage that like a dog or a pet cat will go in to bring them to the vet. But what happens is you leave that door open and you put some food in the back of it, and the animal will walk in, and there'll be a little plate on the back that they step on. And when they step on that, it pulls a trigger and the door closes on them. And so we can catch them that way. So we set the trap, and then we go walk away, and then we bait it, and then they come in, they step on that little plate, and it closes the door. And then another way, the way we did it with bears, and actually, this is a good video to show you guys. I'll show you actual bear in the trap. How about that? Okay. Let's share my screen. Okay, so this was my friend Mike and I. And I gotta move this a little bit so I can see where I'm going. So this is a bear that we captured. Let's pause it for a second. There, where's my pause button? Okay, so you see that? That is a cable that it's attached to his paw. And we'll keep watching a little bit. So he's stuck for a second. I'll go to, there we go. That's a good one. So that cable is attached to that tree. And what we do is we build, I'll stop sharing a little bit for a second so I can show you. So we put that cable wrapped around a tree. And then, so there's this loop. And you put the loop on the ground, and you dig a hole where that loop would be, and you put this spring, and that spring you put in the ground, and you close it, and then you put that loop on top of the spring. And so when the animal steps down into that hole, it hits this little trigger that pushes down, and it lets that spring go up, and that spring pulls on that cable, and that cable then tightens around their paw. So then they're attached to that tree. And so then what we do is this bear then is attached. And what we want to do, I got to press share, sorry. There we go. So what we want to do is we want to make him go to sleep. So we give him a drug that makes him go to sleep so that then we can work on it. And so this is Mike, and he is using this blowgun to try and get this guy. Let's see, I'll show you where. I think, let it catch up. So Mike is trying to get him. Okay, almost there. There we go. So Mike's going to get him, and he wants to use a dart, like a Nerf gun kind of. And this Nerf gun has the drug in it. And so he puts that drug in him, and then that bear will go to sleep. And so now I'll show you what it looks like when he's asleep. Here we go. So now that bear, let's see, where's full screen at so you guys can see it. So now we have this bear, and this bear is asleep, and we are going to take measurements. And so you can see here, Mike's putting on that GPS collar so we can take locations of where the bear travels. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take measurements. I'm going to see how big she is. And so I get a measuring tape out. And here I'm going to measure how long her arm is. Okay. And then so Mike writes down that number. And so we're going up from here to her shoulder. And then now, so that's what this measurement is, from her wrist to her shoulder. And then I'm going to measure the size of her paws, and that's her claws. And her claws, she uses those for climbing. And a grizzly bear, his claws will be a lot longer. And the grizzly bear uses his claws, like if you've ever dug in a garden and you use a rake, that's what a grizzly bear does, is he uses those as like a rake, and he's gonna kind of pull up like plants and stuff and flip rocks to eat bugs and tear apart stumps to eat ants and whatnot and bugs. And so that's what they use their claws for. So then I'm going to measure how big her paw is. And so we do that for all these bears so we can get an idea of how big the animals are. And then we can use those information, those data that we collect to then answer questions we have about the animal. So we have a lot of different ways of capturing animals, and that's only 3.
Hello, I can't hear a thing.
Good question, Harini.
Sorry, I was muted. I didn't
No
realize
problem.
that. So next question will be from Samuel. You can go ahead, Samuel.
Hello.
Hey, Samuel.
Is he still? I don't think Samuel is on the call right now. So I'm going to move on to the next person. I'm sorry if I'm saying that name wrong. Arohi, are you there? Yes. Arohi, can you unmute? Yeah. You can ask your question.
What is the average age of a bear?
Ooh, that's a really good question. The average age. Oh, goodness. Well, the oldest they can live is about, I would say, in the wild. So the wild's a hard place to live. I think if you get like a 15 or a 20-year-old bear, that's going to be an old bear. And I would say a lot of bears are going to be probably like 8 to 10 years old, 8 to 12 years old.
Okay. Let's go to the next question from Aditya.
When did you start learning about wildlife?
Oh, I started in, well, a couple of ways. One is I went to school to study wildlife specifically when I went to college. So I was 18. But I grew up, so we grew up with a ranch and doing lots of outdoors activities. And so I grew up learning about wildlife kind of my whole life. But I started going to school to study wildlife when I was 18 and I went to college.
Okay. So Eshana and Harini have more questions. Go ahead, Eshana.
Why is it important to like catch bears?
That's a good question, right? So we catch bears for a few reasons. And mainly why we do it is what we want to do is, so remember that collar that I showed you that we put on its neck, that GPS collar? That tells us where the bear travels. And by knowing where it travels, we can learn what areas they like to stay in, okay? And so if we know what areas they like to stay in, then we can use that information then to then protect those areas. So then, for example, let's say they live in a forest, but a new mall wants to get built where that forest is. If we don't have information on where bears live, then we wouldn't necessarily know that they like that particular forest, and we might cut down the trees and then we might build a mall over it. Okay? And so by getting that information and capturing them, we can learn what types of areas do bears like to live in. We can also tell where they like to move through. So one of the important things with animals is allowing them to travel between places. So for example, for us, let's say you guys live in the Toronto area, right? Now let's say you wanted to go to your capital and visit the nation's capital, visit Ottawa. Well, if you don't have roads to drive on, you can't get there, right? And so what we can do with bears is they need those specific roads to travel on to get from place to place as well. And so maybe there's two big forests and there's a town in the middle, and this bear wants to get from this forest to this forest. Well, what we can learn from bears is we can watch where they walk through, and we can say, oh, there's a bunch of forests down here that we didn't know, and this is where the bears are going through, but there's an interstate that's kind of blocking them. Well, maybe we should put a bridge for them to cross the interstate here. That way they can get from this forest to this forest. And they do that in, you guys are probably familiar with Banff National Park over in British Columbia. They do that over there. They have the big interstate that crosses Banff. They have these really giant bridges and tunnels that go over and under the interstate that allows animals to cross the interstate safely without getting killed by a car. And so we capture animals so that we can put those collars on them so we can learn where they like to try and cross. And then we can put those bridges and tunnels there in those areas for them to use to cross safely. Good question.
So our last question is from Harini again. Go ahead.
You know how you say you once you find like the hair of an animal, you would you know which animal it is. After you know which animal it is, what would you do? Would you find it?
In my case, no. So that was the really good thing is once we had the hair, we didn't have to do anything else. We could use that hair. Like for example, let's say I got hair from you, Harini, and I could get DNA from it, and I could find it, and I could say, okay, this is Harini. And then from there, anytime I get a new hair sample, I could find a piece of hair and get the DNA from that. And I could look at it and I go, oh, that's not Harini, that's someone else. Until one day I'm in, let's say you went and visited Vancouver. I get hair, I try it, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my goodness, this is Harini. Oh, Harini's in Vancouver right now. So we would use that info to try and figure out where you traveled. And we also use it to figure out who's related to who. So for example, let's say we know who Harini is. And then we know who someone in Vancouver is. And we could say, well, how is Harini and this person related? And then we were like, no, they're not related. And then we go, here's Harini, and here's your family member. Do you have a brother or a sister?
Yeah, I have a little sister.
You have a little sister? Well, maybe we get one of her hairs, and then we look at her hair and we go, oh, these two people are really closely related. And so then we could see like, okay, let's say we get everyone in your town and we get all their hair. Then we could see how many people you're related to and how related people in your town are to maybe the people in the next town or the people across the, across the country in Vancouver or across the ocean in a different country. And so that's kind of what we do with bears as well, is once we get that hair, we can tell who they're related to and which populations are related, how many there are, if it's a male or if it's a female bear, but we don't have to go find them again after that.
Okay, those were some really good questions.
Yeah.
And since there's no one else asking questions, I just want to say, Esana and Harini, for asking so many questions and participating. That was really nice and fun. And thank you, Matthew, for holding the session and talking to us and getting us really interested in wildlife biology. It was such a nice topic. Philip, do you want to add anything else before we end the session?
No, it was a very interesting and useful session, Matt. Do you have any more interesting videos you wanted to show? Some more videos?
I have lots of videos. Let's show this one. Let's see here. Ooh, I'm trying to navigate on my screens. Too many screens. Okay, share that one. All right. So I have a few videos here. So this one is of an owl. This is called a great horned owl. And you guys, if you've ever heard an owl in Toronto, you probably heard these guys. So this is a big owl. And you can see how big he is. And see how far he turns his head back? He can turn it completely around to look at this guy. He has these giant claws. And they use those claws to capture mice and other food items when they're hunting. And then we have, oh, this is really cool. This is a baby owl. And you can see, look at his bill, he's clicking it together. And he's doing that to try and warn you because he's scared. And so he clicks his bill together as a little warning sign. And so what they're doing here is for birds, what we do is we can't always put one of those GPS units on them, right? Because they can be expensive. But what we do is they put these little bands or rings on their leg, and that'll stay on their leg for their whole life. And then if they ever die or someone else captures them again, that we can look up the information on that. It's almost like putting a collar on your dog. It's the same thing. Someone finds that little band, they can then look up and see, oh, this owl was banded in Montana and we captured him all the way over in Ontario. And then we can learn about how far they're traveling. What else? This is them releasing an owl. So they're super quiet. You can't hear them fly at all. Ooh, I have a real cool video I know I can show you. Where is it? Okay, I'll just look here. Oh, this one's cool, yeah. This was a rattlesnake that we saw while we were. And so you can see him flicking his tongue. And their tongue has these special, let's see if I can play it again. Their tongue has these special, it's called receptors. And those receptors bind or they attach. It's kind of like, you know how you can taste stuff, your taste buds taste things? Well, they can taste the air. And so they're using it to like sniff and taste who you are. And so that's how they use to like detect certain animals. And so this is called a Western diamondback rattlesnake. And their tail has, it's like a shaker. It has a bunch, it's hollow. It has a bunch of rattles in it. And so when they're scared or threatened, they'll curl up like this and they'll rattle the tail as a warning for you to keep away from them. So these guys are very dangerous, very venomous. So if they bite you, they could potentially kill you. And so they try and warn you because they don't want to. Oh, quick question. Can you guys hear any of the audio on these videos?
No.
Oh, too bad. This one's really cool. So this was a grizzly bear that was roaring, that he was he had been captured, and so he was roaring. Oh, this is a cool video too. So when we capture things. This was me in Northwest Montana. I was real young here. Let me find it for you guys real quick. So this was past it. Oh, okay, it's right before this. So this is my friend or my partner Mike and I. And Mike and I are carrying these big bags with all of our gear to study the bear. And our trap site was across this river. And the only way to get to it, because this river was super deep, was to walk across this tree. But yeah, we had these really heavy backpacks on our backs, probably like, 30 kilograms. And so Mike and I were joking with him, trying to tell him, don't fall in the river. And so this was us carefully crossing a river. Luckily, we didn't fall in, but it was it's always a little scary when you have a big heavy pack on. Let's see if I can bump it up so I can show you. There we go. Now it's good stuff. This is me getting really nervous, going, okay, don't fall in. And so I was walking very slowly while I was doing it. And this right here is especially where I was like, oh goodness, now I'm right in the middle of it. I felt better once I could get to here, because if I started to fall, I could at least jump onto the bank. But prior to that, I was a little nervous. And let's see, I'm sure I can find another video for you guys. What's that one? That's that one. Let me look on. Oh, I don't think I'll have up here. That's on my other computer. Oh, but I do have. Oh, that's where it is. Okay. It's on this one. Files. Oh, backup. Videos. Let's see what New Mexico is. Oh, this one's cool. This one's really cool. This is one of my favorites. Okay. So you guys, this is New Mexico. And this here, this is an old lava tube. So this was an old volcano. And the lava or the magma flows through these tubes until it gets to where the cone is, right? And then it erupts out of the volcano and goes over the land. Well, over millions of years, these tubes collapse and erode away from wind and water. And so in those tubes, because they're caves now, the bats will live there. And so these are called Mexican free-tailed bats, and they are leaving this cave. And for about 30 to 45 minutes, it's a steady stream of bats coming out. So there's millions and millions of bats flying. And so these are, okay, start playing. There we go. So those are all bats flying, and you can see a guy. And then if you see up here in the background, you see these bigger birds that are all flying. So when these bats come out at night, all of these hawks show up and they hunt the bats. And that's what they catch for food, is all of these bats. And so we went and we watched these bats and watched these hawks hunt these bats. And I'll see if I can find some cool videos. Oh, that's a good one. And so if we pause it, you know, every little brown speck here, that's a single bat. And so this whole thing is just filled with bats flying.
Matt, I
Yeah.
think Harini has one question.
Absolutely, go ahead.
How do you travel how do you travel to capture an animal?
So there's a few different ways, and it depends on where you're capturing the animal at. So a lot of times, what we'll do is we'll drive, and then you'll hike off a road for a little ways. So that's usually the most common, because we have a lot of gear with us, and you have to spread your traps out. We've also hiked and carry a backpack. So hiking, you know, I don't know, 5 or 10 kilometers on a trail, and you'll check a bunch of traps along the way. We've also used horses before. So we put all our gear in a horse, and then we'd ride on the horses on a trail. People have used ATVs when there's a lot of snow. They've used skis, snowshoes, boats. So my girlfriend, she uses boats to catch the sturgeon, and they'll spotlight at night, and they'll find a sturgeon, the juvenile sturgeon, so baby sturgeon, when they're only about 8 or inches to centimeters. I don't know that one. 8 inches, so about this long. Okay. They'll spotlight. They'll take this really bright light, and they'll go up and down the river until they see one. And then when they do, they take 2 nets and they scoop it up out of the water. So they use a lot of different things. Sometimes they'll use helicopters, and they'll have these net guns. And so they'll go on these helicopters, and they'll chase like a deer, and they'll shoot a net over them. And that's how they'll do that as well. Let's see, I'm trying to think if I have any cool videos left for you guys. Lots of videos. Let me check one other thing. Mexico, cranes. Montana. Ranch trapping. Showed you guys those ones. Let's see here. Oh, there's that. Okay, this is actually Harini. This gets back to one of the questions you asked. So another way that we will catch an animal is we'll use, this is called a barrel trap. And it's like you put a big barrel and tip it on its side. And then it's kind of like that cage we were talking about, where they walk in and then they get to the end and they step on, or they pull something that then drops the door on them. And so this is a grizzly bear that they've captured in one area and they're moving to another. And so you can see him, he's just kind of relaxing in there. And we're there to release it because they want to put it in a new area. And so he's just waiting for us. Let's see, is this the next one? So we're watching him, and they're going to open that trap door. And once that trap door's open, he's going to run down. There he goes. So now what happened, and so the reason why this gets back to, who asked the question about endangered animals? So in Montana, this mountain range doesn't have many grizzly bears, and we're trying to recover them. We're trying to get more to where they can be a healthy population and we don't worry about them anymore. And so what they do is they go to an area that has lots of grizzlies, and they'll take some and they'll put them over here to try and build that population up. And so that's what we were doing here, is we had a grizzly from one area that we were bringing into the mountain range that we were in. And then let's see what else we got here. Okay. More bears. Lots of bear pictures. There's a bear. Too many bears, huh? You're probably thinking, man, that's all this guy does. It says bear videos. Let's see. Oh, this was a bear. So this is actually out at our ranch in Montana, but this was a bear that came in the yard, and these are apple trees. And this guy, he is a fat old bear. You see how big his belly is? So that belly of his is probably half or twice as big as what it'll be come spring. And so he was there eating all the apples off the ground because he wants to put on as much fat before he goes to sleep for the winter. with that, don't know, might have more pictures of the black-footed ferrets. There we go. So that's them running around. Yeah, they're little, they look like little wiener dogs, but even skinnier. So I think that's the videos I have on this one. Yeah.
Okay, so those were some great videos. I hope everyone enjoyed watching the
Okay,
videos.
thank you, Matt. It was really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. And if you guys ever have any questions, feel free to have Dilip contact me. I'll be more than happy to answer them for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.